Some they call it functional alcoholism, but if you know anything about Ben, he's got vision with precision, microphones and a tinkle of derision. You're about to hear what beer can be. It's time for Barley and Me.
Welcome to Barley and Me. I'm your host, Ben Rice. This is episode 153. We're here today at Urban Roots Brewing in Sacramento. With us today are special guests, so many of them. We got Tara Nurin, beer journalist and the author of an upcoming book.
A Woman's Place is in the Brew House.
Tara, thank you so much for coming out.
Thank you. I'm so happy to see you. This was a really nice surprise.
Yeah, you were on episode 135. I do remember that. I looked that up before we started recording. When you were in the editing process, getting ready to publish, and now this book is coming out.
That's right. It is coming out September 21st, which I believe is...
If we promise this correctly, it's tomorrow.
It's tomorrow.
Yeah.
And this was my first event, my first official book event today.
That's crazy.
Here in Sacramento. Such a nice, receptive, welcoming crowd, and really happy to start out here because I have no memory of being here ever in my life. Though I think I was here as a baby, but this is like ostensibly my first time.
That's crazy.
Crazy.
And also with us, Herlinda Heras from KSRO's Brew Ha Ha Radio Drive Time Talk Show.
How's it going?
Good.
Glad to be here in Sacramento, having some good barbecue and some really good beers here, too.
Oh, yeah. I was shocked when you were introduced to Peter Hoey. I'm like, you guys didn't already know each other?
I might have been introduced to him at like a CBC or a GABF or a party or something like that, but I don't think so though. Rob has been on from Pangea has been on, that now is partner here at Urban Roots, has been on my show, and of course I fangirled him because I love Pangea.
Yeah.
Nicole Ernie we all went with like the CCBA, the beer festival, but Nicole Ernie's like, you have to come and check this out. And I've been actually the first time I came to Urban Roots was also with Nicole Ernie, their own personally tour guide there. But yeah, I don't think I've actually met him in person.
That's so weird to me.
I know it is weird. What a nice guy though too.
Yeah.
He is. He so is. Yes.
Yeah. And that's third voice you're hearing is Melissa McCann, founder of Women's International Beer Summit.
Nice.
That is exactly right.
And of course, the Queen of Beer homebrewing competition.
Yes.
Indeed. Yes.
Yeah, so we have a lot to talk about. And by we, I mean not me at all.
Girl power.
Yeah.
Wonder twin
Yes.
and wonder triple powers activate.
Yeah, because I think last time you were on, Tara, we had a conversation where I also just was like, I think you guys can just talk and everything will be fine. And it turned out great. It was
That's
very
actually
fun.
what happened with the summit too.
Indeed. It was
Tara
so
and
fun. Yes. Tara and Herlinda were on the International Beer Summit last April. So we're looking forward to having them on the 2022 summit as well.
I think what we might do actually is have a part 2 of our conversation, which
I agree.
Was so Herlinda and I have been besties for several years now, and we do a lot of really, really cool traveling locally and internationally. And Melissa said, why don't you guys just get on and tell some stories? And we were like, oh, okay, I think we could probably do that. And so we told travel stories.
5 hours later.
5 hours.
But also was like a lot of it was about like people wanted to know how we got into traveling for beer.
Right.
And journalism and and judging beer as well. And I judged beer and food in a bunch of different countries. I just got back from Finland for judging their national competition.
Right.
But people that was like the big question everybody wanted to know, especially with Tara, Forbes magazine and writing a book. They were like, how did you do that? What were and so that actually went back to college.
Right.
She went to school. She has a master's in that. I do not, and I just got really lucky.
Yeah, I think I totally want another interview where you're just talking about your adventures together because it was so fun. And there's just so many great stories on there.
Wait till we go to Belgium.
I know, right?
Oh, man.
And I may have to join in that one as well. But I also want a separate session on just the book because there's so much going on there and the release is happening so we can actually maybe give away some books at the summit and just maybe get some, personally signed, books for everyone. I think that would be fabulous. So
I really do want as many people as possible to read this book, not because I think I'm going to get rich, because I think I'm going to get poor, actually, writing my first book. But, there's so many people and places and stories that are so important to get out that have been so overlooked for millennia that, the more people, men and women and otherwise, can read it, I think it would really help elevate the conversation around beer and who brews it, who benefits from it, how it's marketed.
Where it's going with women,
where
too.
It's going,
Yes.
especially, with everybody wants to talk about the Me Too stuff that's happening, luckily, very overdue right now in craft beer.
Yeah.
And they're just conversations there's so much opportunity for conversation. And the point of the book really is there are several points, but one of them is to sort of explore culture through beer. So even if somebody's not necessarily a beer person, there's so much to learn about the women's role in society and just how society has evolved, societies, plural. Over the, for the past 200,000 years. Like, there's just, it's page turning, I promise.
right?
Yeah, it's running parallel to just human history, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah, like you see royalty rise and fall, and it kind of all falls in line with how that stuff's progressing as well.
So
Madness.
true. And to see the parallels between the way, the small-minded ways people were thinking thousands of years ago, and to see modern examples that absolutely parallel. The details are different, but the story is the same.
Yeah, that's happening in a few different realms. Weird, I'll say, and then leave it at that.
Right.
A few different realms. It's like, this story sounds familiar from, I don't know, like 50, 60 years ago. Their stories are fairly similar.
Sure.
That's
a good
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
It's
it
just
is
a common thread that goes through the fabric of life,
Yeah.
and it just keeps flowing through. So,
And I guess the hope with all of this stuff that we're talking about directly and alluding to is that we can be 2 steps forward, 1 step back, instead of 1 step forward, 2 steps back. And the work that the 3 of us do, as women in beer, I think in our own ways, each of us really is pushing the narrative forward, creating more opportunities for exposure, for one, for women in beer. I have no sage point after that.
Exposure and equality,
Right.
as much as possible. I mean, I'll go back to Finland again about that. Both Tara and I have both been to Finland for beer stuff and travel. But I always delve deep into wherever I go. And one of the great things about Finland that we could learn a lot about that, it's a very, that country is all about equality. And they also they were the first country to allow women to be in elections for vote. Yeah. And they have a woman prime minister right now, but it's not their first.
Right.
Unlike us, who's still a little behind.
Spinning our wheels on it.
Yeah.
Right.
But they are very much about going ahead and calling things out. And they're like light years ahead of us. But except for that, when I look ahead, are we going to roll backwards, or are we going to get like that?
Yeah. We're pushing a boulder up a hill. Are we going to make it over the crest, or is it just going to toppling back down on us? Is a fun thought to have as you fall asleep at night.
Why people have to vote.
Yeah.
Right.
Keep voting.
Yeah. And don't be afraid of change. Change is usually good. Not always, but I think the real
Right.
issue is I'm scared of change, and I'm scared of losing power and authority. And how much do most people really have of either of those in the grand scheme of things? So anyway, the point is, you wrote a book. And here's what I like. I just thought of this while we were talking, is that, Herlinda, you were on the radio quite frequently so you can get your daily dose of information.
Yeah.
And then you're like, I want to learn more. Oh, there's this book that we can get from Tara Nurin. And it's like, well, now let's have a big old celebration. We've got a beer summit with
Let's
Melissa.
do that.
It's a great thread.
Yeah, look at me
Can
go.
we borrow
There it
that?
is. It's all woven in.
Yeah. Well, and every time Tara's been in town or called in, I make sure. And as soon as she said that, I'm like, and she's going to be writing a book, and she's writing a book, and she's finished a book, and now she's about to do a book tour. And we've been talking about the places we've been and the people we've met and the people that are part of her research, like every time. And that's like, and even the stories that you write about are like a fabric of that book also.
I mean, the people we've met, the people we meet in beer all the time of any gender are just
men and women, that's for sure.
crazy inspiring. Yes. I don't know, I'm just in awe of so many beer people. And then, choosing specific women to highlight for the book means I'm choosing them for a particular reason, whether they were pioneers in the early days. We have some.
We have a casualty over
we have
here somewhere.
a restaurant casualty. Just to learn about the perseverance that these women have had,
Right.
and that a lot of them in the early days in the 80s who were working in beer were coming from logging, ski patrol rescue, landscaping engineers, just the tough,
Hardy.
the hardy, right, and just the freaking intelligence of the people we've gotten to meet and that I've gotten to interview along the way are just I want everybody to know about them. They're so impressive.
Creativity in these women also. And then there's like Judy Ashworth.
Yep.
Tara was just telling that she actually read an excerpt from her book about Judy and then did a little opening for that as well about how Judy was the first one to do Christmas in July.
Well, she owned a pub in the 80s, one of the first craft beer bars in the country.
What did she call it? The Kick Out the Bud Party?
Oh, Buy to Bud Party. So Judy had this East Bay brewery in the 80s, and not a brewery, sorry, one of the first beer bars. And
pub,
like Herlinda's saying, she was one of the first bars in the country, probably the first bar to stop serving macro.
Yeah.
On tap. She had Christmas in July. She did Meet the Brewer. She prohibited smoking in her bar. She put, what's the decorative touch?
The flowers. The
In
flowers.
between the urinals and the men's room. Fresh cut flowers.
Fresh cut flowers every day to try to cultivate respect and education surrounding the beer. And I didn't know about Judy until a couple years ago when I was researching and happened to come across her. And we keep talking about Judy, today because, she's a Northern California fixture in beer, and she was so influential in the types of activities we come to expect now from beer bars.
Yeah.
Outside of the California homebrewing community,
Almost nothing.
no one knows
Right.
who she is. Never
Yeah.
heard of her.
And Judy's still supporting these young brewers. I was just at a party at her house.
Yes.
And the revision guys come from
Yeah.
Nevada.
Yeah, Jeremy, yeah,
they
Jeremy,
come cruising
yeah.
in with kegs of fresh revision. They just drove there for the party. And
At her house.
At her house, in her garage in the
Yeah.
Oasis. And they're tapping fresh
Yep.
beer. And
Yep.
we're just having a great time. But and when Tara and I were there at her house, when she was researching the book, she was like, oh, you have to try this one. This is a new one. Not like, oh, this one I used to serve, this I used to. And then she did have this great reverence for British beer styles and local, beers as well. But she's still looking at the
She
young
knows
ones.
what's going
Yeah.
on. That's why I
Yeah.
told you, as people
She's
around here
80.
call her the
79 or 80.
beerological mother
Yeah.
of, in California.
Yeah.
That's her nickname with the brewers around here. So
Yeah, she's like 79 or 80. I need to be careful because
she
will
just
kick
had her
my butt.
80th birthday. Yeah,
It was 80. Okay, so I thought.
you
Okay,
said,
I was
yeah.
right. All right.
Yeah.
To some extent, I think it takes women to talk about women, and you can substitute women in for, it takes African Americans to talk about African Americans, etc.
Hispanic and a whole
Hispanic,
bit, yeah.
whatever,
Support.
gender non-conforming, because the gatekeeping that exists in archival historical writings, and it's not intentional necessarily, but it's that the narratives are written by the people in power, the people who have access.
A lot of it was intentional.
Yeah.
And then
let's talk. I mean, there's some serious
let's
intentional.
just be honest.
There's it's like the Bible, like things being cut out. Let's talk about intentional men cutting women out of some of these things, and not just women, genders and ethnicities and tribes and all kinds of stuff too.
Yeah, and so without women, like, we'll just keep it to women for now because that's what we're talking about. But it applies across the board.
Even now with voting, they're still trying to cut. It's intentional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
You have your language you use to make it seem like this is just by chance. It's like, well, what are the odds that it keeps happening this exact way?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So the more women, for instance, thank you for having the three of us on your podcast, for instance. We as women are going to be more conscious of telling women's stories. And of course there are men doing that work too.
Yeah.
More often than not.
Yeah, and Ben's been a big supporter of
Yes.
women in beer since the moment I met him.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's true. But
Yes.
moving on.
No, but that's good. I mean, I want to give kudos to a guy doing a podcast, and as soon as he comes to the reading of a book about a women's beer history on purpose, and he brings his recording equipment because I want to talk to them.
Well, just in case. Just in case.
Yeah.
Always
Just
be
in
prepared.
case we had anything to say.
Right, yeah.
Right.
Like, I don't know what their schedule is after this, but maybe. That's why I didn't bring it in the brewery with me. I'm like, it's in my car. But then Herlinda's like, do you have your stuff? I'm like, of course I do.
Yeah, I knew. I'm like,
Yeah.
and I knew. I'm like thinking, this is a good opportunity. I would.
Right.
I've had my stuff. I would want to talk to you guys as well.
Well, and when I was on your podcast the last time, you had me paired with a woman who is a sex worker advocate.
Interesting.
And we talked about the
parallel history again.
Oh.
Because these things all run parallel. It's just the same stuff over and over again. But yes, carry on.
Yeah, well, exactly right. So she was talking about historical oppression of sex workers, and I was talking about the parts in the book where usually it's when religion comes in to try to squeeze women out of the brewing narrative.
Which religion is about money, a lot of it.
And how sex was used against women. There were stereotype lies made up, just like where the unnecessary sexualization of women was used against us to keep us away from brewing and keep us out of accessing resources. Is that a fair sort of
pretty much
explanation?
Like if you thought that a woman was going to be able to go out on her own at some point and not need a man, we're like, no. Please, we will control the money. Thank you.
And
like,
you're a prostitute.
Yeah. It's like
banish
oh, you wanted autonomy of your body? No, thank you. You wanted to make money using your skill set? No. Get back in the kitchen and do it for free for my family. Yeah. Just over and over again. Anytime there's a chance where women might have like a little bit more authority in the world, they're like, no. Bash this down.
Which is why her book is also not just a woman's places in the brew house, but a history of
a forgotten history
of
alewives, brewsters,
witches, and CEOs.
There we go.
And those CEOs.
Teamwork.
Natalie Chalurza from Russian River Brewing is in the book. You've also got Carol Stout, who's famous in the Pennsylvania area near where Tara's from, is in the book.
Mariah Calgione.
I was going to say Mariah. Yeah.
Co-founder of Dogfish Head, early craft brewery owners. Irene Vermont, for instance, Full Sail. She started Full Sail in
Nice.
for instance.
I
mean,
didn't
know that either.
I didn't know a woman started Full Sail until she was like, I'm going to do. She wants to do. We're going to be doing some book signings. She's like, well, no, I want to be at Full Sail because Irene was there. And I'm like, I didn't realize a woman had started Full Sail.
Yeah. And we got
awesome.
Sierra from Sierra Nevada.
I mean, on and on and on. Deb Carey from New Glarus comes to mind as an early woman who she hired. Dan Carey is a phenomenal brewer who's been lauded forever. Her husband, but no, I'm sorry. I am getting confused. So Deb started the brewery, and Dan, her husband, came up, once she had sort of gotten all the paperwork and approvals. Irene from Full Sail, Jamie Emerson is her husband. He's also a famous brewer, has won a million awards over the years. She founded the brewery, got some investors, hired Jamie as her brewer out of Big Beer, and then married him. Yeah, you went earlier.
Nice.
You were like, boom.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, there
Yeah.
you go. Sorry.
Then, of course, you've got Lost Coast as well.
Right?
right.
Barb?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's-
Barbara Groom.
Like, when you
Yep.
think about it, there's just so many that
Totally.
when you think about, like, the first, like, 20, 30 breweries in the U.S., like, oh, a lot of these were actually women doing this.
But then
And we still were like, men run brewing.
I know.
It's so true. And I mean, part of that is because, usually it's the man who's the brewer. And so that the brewer
It's the
steps
face of the
forward and
franchise, yeah.
takes care
But
of the
her
face.
book is like
Or is
about
the
how
face.
women were the brewers for like starting like 200,000 years ago, the Sumerians. So she
Before
starts
the
even
Sumerians.
before that. Yeah, him did Ninkasi. Sumerian.
Sumerian.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
But we start pre-civilization.
Oh, that's right. Hunter-gatherer.
Looking at hunter-gatherers, how beer was probably discovered at that point, what the role of women probably was before we ever civilized, came together and settled around an agrarian society, to grow grain, whether for bread or beer. It starts like 200,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And then comes to the present and looks forward. Like, it was really nice today here at Urban Roots. There were a couple of female beer tenders and managers who snuck away from the bar for a little while, and it was nice to be able to like actually point to them and say like, okay, well, so women have been kicked out of brewing for millennia, but thanks to the invention, we'll say, of craft beer, we now have more and more and more and more women coming into it. And here you three ladies are, and like again, like we said at the beginning, here we are, the three of us, and I'm talking too much, so somebody else.
No,
say
you're
something.
just
Yeah.
fine.
You're doing great.
Well, and those
thanks.
girls were those ladies that were working when I came up to get my beer, and she was telling me how excited she was that you were coming here and doing
Yeah.
this talk. I mean, she was like super excited. Like I was like really glad to see that, and
That is a reaction I'm getting a lot.
she's like 25. It's awesome.
Right.
There's just this like, I feel like there's this. I don't know if that.
You're filling
Can
a
you
void.
translate?
I can't.
You're filling a
it's
void
The
with this book.
excitement is just
Yeah.
like finally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of like what you were talking about when we had the talk just a few minutes ago about how women were saying everything's fine.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden the question comes about from Brienne and Brave Noise, and all of a sudden women felt comfortable sharing their story. And as soon as that few people stepped up and said, here's what happened, all of a sudden this, I'm just going to say it, fucking avalanche
Yeah.
of
Well, so you reached the tipping point.
people were willing, and they felt finally a safe space to say, me too. This happened. And it was, I just feel like all of it is it's such a catalyst, all of us finally stepping up and saying, how are you doing? What's happening? How are you? How is this going? And finally, women are feeling comfortable telling their story.
That's such a nice point. And in listening to you say that, I feel like a little bit of that, just that part about how are you doing, maybe needed to come out of the time and place that it did. Like, I think this Me Too reckoning was decades in
Yeah.
the making.
I-
Decades.
Some would say
of
centuries.
I agree.
centuries.
Well-
and yet, this aspect of like, I think in the pandemic,
I
people
do
have
too.
been talking more
Oh.
about like, how
Yeah.
are you?
Yeah.
Right,
and
right.
so
I totally agree.
Yeah, it's
so
like, do you miss
interesting.
brewing? It's like, not really. Why? Oh, because this thing kept
Yeah.
happening at work or
Well,
whatever it is.
I loved how Julia Hertz said, Julia Hers, and I really appreciate it, how she said like the Women's International Beer Summit was kind of a catalyst for what happened with Rat Magnet and Brienne. But I don't want to take any credit for that. But I love how maybe it created a safe space to have that conversation. I want Brienne to have all of that to herself, as far as what she did and what she created. And I'm just so thankful that it happened and we're able to finally have that conversation.
I'm curious, what did Julia say?
Well, the timing of it all, we did the Women's International Beer Summit late April,
Right.
and then all of a sudden this happened with Brienne.
June?
And she that was in May. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden this conversation started, and it was just like, poof, and then it just blew up into, I don't even know how many, like 1,500 responses in like less than
The first-
24
yeah.
hours.
And a lot of resignations.
And
Yeah.
it was so interesting. And I love how she wants to give us credit as part of the catalyst to it all, but I don't want to take any credit for that at all. I want that all to be Brave Noise, and I want that to go forward and get that beer brewing for the benefit of the women affected by this.
I feel like it was so waiting to happen. And I'm sorry, I'm going to put a gross image out there, but it's like a zit that needed to pop.
Right? A boil. Yeah. Totally. It was
Boiled
time for
that
it to be
needed to be
lanced.
lanced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was time.
Yeah.
So maybe the Women's Beer Summit was like create the start of the safe space, but I don't want any credit for that at all. I want that all to be on Brienne and what she was able to create on her own.
I think it's just really tearing down the stigma, because there's a lot of stigma of being a victim and not much stigma to being the perpetrator. Like when you would come forward in the 90s and stuff like that, you would be stigmatized.
Oh, yeah.
And then the other person would be
Right.
able to carry on with whatever. They're like, oh, guys will be guys.
Yeah.
And so I
Right.
think there's been a steady progression of like, hey, maybe we should stop victim blaming and moving through that. I think
Right.
a lot of the programs within the liquor industry have been helpful in moving it forward. Like, if you're going to say, I don't want to be the person who did this, like, well, we could pass the buck down to the Pink Boot Society. We're like, hey, there is a community of women brewers that we're all experiencing the
Right.
same thing.
Yeah.
But
Right.
I think once you get somebody to kind of tell you what's going on, really, because, like, you can tell when somebody says, oh, no, it's great, you can kind of tell, like, maybe there's something going on that they don't want to tell you because they don't want to be that person who has that stigma on them because
Right.
they like this industry. And if you have a stigma on you, you're not getting... It's already hard enough to find work as a woman in the beer industry. You don't
Right.
want to
Right.
ruin your chance at it because you called out a gross owner,
So thankfully for me and where I'm coming from, nobody in the beer industry is signing my paycheck.
Yeah.
So I am free to say basically whatever I want about what's going on and speak for whoever, in
Yeah.
this industry. So
Yeah.
it's a real safe space for me. So
Yeah, the only negative reaction to this podcast is when I do an episode like this. This is where I get a lot of pushback from listeners. I'm like, what are you scared of exactly that I'm talking about this
unfortunately,
thing?
it's in so many industries.
Yeah.
I've been
And
a
it's not
bartender.
specific to the beer industry, right.
I sold cars. I was the only girl at a car dealership, and that was really bad. I can't even tell you how bad that was. In the bar industry back then, in the 80s and 90s, like you kind of sort of expected, but I had the bar between me and that helped a little bit. But then I had to deal with the owners and other people that I worked with, and I was the only girl on an ambulance crew as well. Back then, and
Yeah. Is it important to point
The-
out that it is all industries? Like, it's just...
It's all industries.
every
It is.
every
It
industry
really
has this
is.
problem.
Industries. I wish, but these young women now are a hell of a
Done
lot
with it.
No, they're a hell of a lot braver than I was, and a lot of my
Yeah.
colleagues.
There's a
back-
support structure in place now. There's people that will believe you, that will fight for you. It's a lot better in that respect. And you're going to have the people that just don't want to turn the tide, but whatever.
the thing with Tara's book, it's the first one that talks about the first book that does the global history of women and way back. I mean, maybe they weren't even putting it in writing or anything. I mean, when you were doing your research, how much of, obviously there was marginalization, but how much of like actually full-on harassment or abuse was there? Did you find anything?
As far as
Even far back, I'm sure it was probably worse in some ways, but
harassment and abuse in historical brewing. Yeah, that's an interesting question. None.
Because it wasn't getting
Right.
getting
Right. And
reported
so
written down.
did it not happen?
Yeah.
Was it not chronicled? On and on and on. The questions are endless and we may never know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't come across any specific examples. But like, as you know, because you were with me when I was writing some of this, the further back you go, the more general and vague the narrative is. So there's
Do you
no
think
way to know.
to back as many years as you went that the brewers for the household, that beer was just for that household, so there wouldn't have been as much discrimination? It would have been seen as that's your job as far as our family system, and this is what you need to do. So probably there wasn't as much discrimination other than it was that's your job.
Yeah, that's a great point that probably does address exactly what you just asked her, Linda, which was every time brewing became an actual commercial endeavor, meaning you left the house and went and had coworkers in an offsite brewery, it was men who did that. So the women historically who've brewed, have been in their house.
It was for
So
their
they didn't
family.
have all those people to sexually harass them, like at work, and I'm air quoting, because at work was like all the household stuff that they were doing.
So
you
probably
had, like-
industrialization is when when it
industrialization.
started
Yeah.
getting interesting.
Yeah, there's a little bit of interest in like we had a house guest and you made a subpar beer or whatever, and now you're gonna get a talking to. You've brought shame on our family type
Seriously,
situation. That's
seriously,
probably
yeah.
where that about came.
And there were, people who did develop reputations as being fabulous brewers. For instance, Martha Jefferson,
Really?
living at Monticello in Virginia, she developed a fabulous reputation for being a good brewer. But what is interesting is it's always like shit rolls downhill, right?
Always.
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 So, getting back a couple minutes to what you were saying about, the sexual harassment and women leaving the industry. And it got me thinking about women who work at breweries who lose their positions, for instance, because the brewer's wife is threatened or the brewer. And these are some of the stories that came out through Brienne's Instagram page, like male owners or brewers being like, oh, she can't work here because she's hot. Like I can't control my own sexual impulses, or my girlfriend is threatened. So the woman gets fired. And that's what it's like in history, and not exactly the same story once again, because, nobody's firing these
Yeah.
cottage industry brewsters brewing for their families. But if you look at greater historical movements, whenever the thought of like a single woman threatened somebody in power, people in power, structures, they would get banished. They would, not be allowed to own property. They wouldn't be allowed to do things, have the rights that they used to. And it's this constant marginalization and alienation, at best, of women through society who take the brunt of everything through history.
Yeah.
On that note.
So let's talk about travel a little bit.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, this is a book where you're doing a lot of history research. So I imagine it's not a quick process to go from I'm going to write this
Or
book
cheap.
to the book is out. Yeah, so this kind of ties into everything: travel, the research, all that stuff.
We went to Sweden, introduced her to Jessica Heydrich, and we went out there and
A brewery owner in Stockholm.
Yeah, and ironically,
Outside Stockholm.
yeah, she was already in Finland and then came over to Stockholm, and then I
Me,
just got
not Jessica.
Yeah, Tara, and then I've just got the chance to go to Finland for judging beer. Fantastic countries. So yeah, we've been to Sweden. I drove her around Northern California to Judy Ashworth's house.
Chico to Sierra.
Of course, to Natalie in Russian River several times. Meet up with Nicole Ernie.
Yeah, we've been to Puerto Rico together and met brewery and bar owners.
Washington, D.C. for the Smithsonian.
Washington,
Yeah, Teresa McCullough.
Smithsonian, Teresa McCullough,
She's
right?
fantastic.
And Liz Garibachi from the Chicago Brewery Museum?
No,
Brewing
it's
Museum. Chicago Brewing Museum?
I forgot the name Brew Museum or something. Anyway,
Brewseum.
Yes, Brewseum.
Museum.
Thank you.
Actually, it is. I think it's
Oh,
the
is it?
Chicago Museum.
Nailed
Yes.
it.
And she's having, she's got a fabulous in-person and virtual conference in November about beer history and has some of the greatest beer historians in the world chiming in, which also then leads into sort of annual conference in Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia, which is also a beer history conference, and I will be speaking at that a couple times as well. As will Liz will be there. I don't think she's
I need to find
speaking,
out
but
if Mark Meltonville's coming.
He
is coming. Oh, good.
I think so.
Wait, I'll check. So Mark
We should
Meltonville,
totally
who you
go.
should totally talk to because he's funny as hell, and you would appreciate that, Ben. But he is also the royal food and drink historian for the historic royal palaces.
Oh.
So he knows everything the queen likes to eat and drink and everything else and why. And all the queens going back way back in Kings. And he actually restores the kitchens at Hampton Court,
Wow.
at Kew Palace, the Elizabethan kitchens. And every time they find something else that, oh, we thought this was a storage closet, it turns out it was King George's kitchen. And they, and things like that. So he also does the food modeling, like the little plastic things and stuff to period. And he comes to Williamsburg every year. He's a British guy. So I gotta introduce you because you'll love
Okay,
him.
please do.
He has a YouTube thing called Time Travelers. It's hysterical. But then he goes to Williamsburg, dresses in costume, colonial costume and everything, and brews in period equipment, recipes, and. So I think that hopefully he'll be there, but you definitely need to talk to him.
That sounds fun.
He is fun.
Yeah, there's a guy, Frank Clark, at Colonial Williamsburg. He's in charge of historic foodways, and he's very into brewing, and he's the guy who is connected with Mark. He's the guy who puts on this beer history conference every year where they talk a lot about like what were colonial settlers brewing. They didn't really have hops at the time. They couldn't really grow them here right at first. So like, what were they learning from the indigenous people to put into their beer? What were some of the like spices and herbs and crazy things that we would not eat at this point in our in our human evolution to make beer? A lot of spruce, like you were talking a lot about juniper having just come from Finland, for instance. So a lot of those herbs and botanicals and such that were used in brewing for a long time before hops became the norm.
Yeah, people are making those beers with those now. They're very fun to just get in there and taste a juniper beer and stuff like that. I love it so much.
They're doing like the sati. So I was just the first American to judge the national sati competition, which is it's the oldest beer style still being brewed in the world. Did you say that's correct, Tara? That's what I was told. Of course, I'm in Finland.
Possibly.
I think so, yeah.
Possibly.
Yeah, it's really old. When I would ask them how old, they're like, really old. Like, before the Viking. And I said, Viking times? And they said, before the Vikings.
It's Stone Age.
Yeah.
And before that,
it's not carbonated, it's not boiled, and they pour it over like juniper. But the juniper in Finland is like so aromatic. It's much more so than here in the berries. But then every region had their own as well, and they're growing sea buckthorn berries. And they have currants everywhere. There's lingonberries all over the ground there, and rowan berries in the trees. And so they've used what they have, and the birch bark. It's like the trees are like that super white birch, and they would have that in there. It's like things that I had with like the birch too were like some of my favorite. Like a birch saison for the sauna. A sauna.
The sauna.
A sauna.
And Brian, though, at Moonlight,
Oh, yeah.
has, what's the name of that beer he just gave us?
Working for tips with the redwood branches
Oh,
from
wow.
our local redwoods there in
Nice.
Sonoma County.
Are there no hop? He's kind of anti-hops. Brian
But he
Hunt
does
at
use
Moonlight
some
in Sonoma.
Yeah.
What?
And so he likes it when he can like brew with redwood tips and
That's so fast. I love that. The foraging.
Great beer.
The
Yeah.
beers from
It's got all
foraging.
these
Yeah,
layers
it's so
of
amazing. Yeah.
Flavor. I know. I would like do. Like somebody was talking about candy cap mushroom beer. Somebody remember?
Oh, yeah.
Tom was.
Yeah, there's one up in Portland. A brewery made one.
Oh man.
The candy cap mushrooms. Yeah,
Fun.
it was. I was like, let's age it and see what happens. It was pretty good. It was very sweet. I
love candy
enjoyed
cap
it a lot.
mushrooms. Yes, those are really yummy.
Do you remember who it was?
I know I interviewed him.
Right.
Alex
Freem,
Falcone. It's no. It's they have the deer. They bought the rights. They have the rights to the Portland deer. They actually beat Portland in a lawsuit.
Oh, I remember when there was a lawsuit.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't know what brewery it
See,
was.
I have a
but-
couple, like, there's one, it's in the space where Tahoe Mountain used to be in Truckee, and they're a forager brewing with what they can find. And then there's also one out of
50-50?
Illinois.
Not 50-50,
No,
okay.
no. It's where Tahoe Mountain used to be on the other side of 80, and I cannot remember the name of that brewery right now, but fantastic. They're doing such a great job. And then I just got some information on another one out of Illinois that's doing some foraging that I want to get to speak at
And
the
of
summit.
course, the guys in Arizona,
I wish I
Arizona Wilderness, the
Yeah.
brothers, and they do foraging.
Fabulous.
Good
Yeah.
stuff.
I
They-
wish I could think of the name of those two breweries I'm talking
They look
about
crazy,
right
but
now.
The
they're
ones in Illinois, if we're thinking of the right, if I'm thinking of the same one, they have a book about foraging
Yes.
for ingredients. Yeah, and I can't remember what they're called right now
and,
either.
and there's a female owner
Yes,
with that, and
yep.
and so she'll be speaking at the summit this next
Oh,
year.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm
All right, I got
really
the information. It's Old Town Brewing that had the
What?
mushroom cap. The
Oh,
right on.
okay.
Right on.
Nice.
We're-
Thank
Well
you.
already
done,
like-
well done, Ben.
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Look,
That
sorry.
was like really 2 minutes ago.
I know. Look,
Because-
I can't be remembering everything.
Funny. Well, I'm still a loser. I can't think of the two
Yeah.
breweries I just brought up. So
well, one thing. Oh, were you about to say?
Oh, I was
something?
just going to say also, I was trying to think of like where else some of the interesting places that we went for travel for the beer. Oh, China. China.
Yeah.
Like,
we've both been to China
yeah, we went
independently.
separately, but you actually got to do a little bit of research there.
I did.
And also when you went, she got to go to the Guinness anniversary. It was like the 250-year anniversary party in Dublin.
very nice. Very
and then
nice.
she went to, did you go to Trinity Library, something to go do some research
Yeah.
there?
I
She
didn't
did.
research, no, but I got to go and
Okay,
and
because
see
you
it. I
went
didn't
someplace
research.
to some library.
Well, I went to the National Library of Scotland.
Scotland, that's it.
For research. I went to the Finnish Literary Society Library for research, which was awesome. And that's how I say that COVID made this a very different book than it would have been.
Yeah.
Because I was doing research
we
in the places I
finally
was
had
going.
our first trip to Belgium.
I finally agreed
Together.
to go to Belgium because
And then there's that.
And we were going to
I had
interview
bad
Sophie-
experiences last time I was there.
Yeah, Sophie. And who was the other lady, that fantastic woman? Rose?
Oh, Rosa Merckx.
Yeah,
At
that-
Leafman's, who's in her late
Okay.
90s and is still living. And she ran Leafman's for a long, long, long time. Her son, Olaf, was running Duvel Mortgott for a time, but I don't think he is anymore. He just got in trouble. Anyway, whatever. But she's really prominent. And yes, we were going to go see her.
We had a bunch of stuff set up for that, and then COVID. And I was like, damn it, I almost finally got to the Belgium.
I know, she almost got me to
But
Belgium.
it would have been, but you're right, it would have been a different book because that Europe stuff, a lot of it got cut out. Like we were lucky to go to Sweden. She had done a lot of stuff, because she also, does a travel for other writing that she does too for magazines and other beer and spirits literature. She gets invited to everything.
Yeah.
I did get to go to Germany and do a lot of research as part of a work trip I was already on. That was like obviously pre-COVID. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting to contemplate the different direction things might have gone in book-wise had I
still
been
a
to other
fantastic
places
book.
to research.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
This
you.
means there's a part 2.
Right.
Yes, I hope
Or,
so.
or revision
There will be.
or updates and
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Always updating.
Always.
The new version
Right,
2.0, whatever you're going to do.
There's so many more stories.
Yeah.
There's
Always.
so much more to write about.
And more will come out of the woodwork, literally,
Oh,
as that
totally.
book comes out. And they'll
Totally,
be like,
yeah.
what
Yeah.
about this? What about that?
Well, one really cool thing that was actually that made the book much more difficult to narrow down and write is that between the time I decided to write the book and the time I wrote the proposal, which took a couple years, and then writing the final draft, the number of women to talk about had changed drastically. So whereas when I first started, it was much more clear cut as to who needed to be included in the book because there were people who were known to be the pioneers at various times in the industry, and then a couple years later there were women everywhere, all over the world, and that just hadn't been the case a couple years earlier when I started. And so that was a neat thing to witness.
And during your talk earlier today, you had mentioned a pretty cool spot in Philadelphia, and then a certain someone still making beer into their 70s with no apprentice. I'm just going to have you repeat
Doris.
stories.
Sister Doris at Mollersdorf Abbey.
In Germany, in Bavaria, Philly, are you talking about?
Carolstadt in Pennsylvania.
Oh.
I feel like there was something in, like, when you're in Philadelphia, you got to do this thing.
Oh, the Penn Museum.
Oh, yeah, the University Penn Museum. What if Dr. Pat that
There we
wrote
go.
Ancient Ales and Uncorking the Past.
Was his first book, I believe.
Yeah.
Dr. Pat has done a lot of research on ancient alcohol and doing all sorts of testing of artifacts found in the field to like carbon date.
Ancient yeast.
And vessels. Is there beer stone inside that they can scrape and determine that there was actually barley beer in that vessel. And he's at the Penn Museum, and Herlinda and I got to go when she visited me. That was a highlight for you of the Philly trip. And so, so
I saw the yeast or like the dust for the Midas dust for the beer that he did with Sam Caljo, but actually from King Midas's tomb.
Seriously.
We were both kind of fangirling over that.
We were super fangirling. Yeah, he held up a baggie with dirt from King Midas's tomb.
You'd think it was the 80s or something. We're like, whoa.
What's in the bag?
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
And that he was involved in because Sam Calgione from Dogfish Head and this guy, Dr. Pat McGovern, had brewed this
Archaeologist extraordinaire
had brewed a beer based on recipes that they thought would have been like around King Midas's time.
And they did one for China.
They did a Sati one, actually.
Did they?
Yep. Or that might have been without Dr. Pat, but Dogfish Head has made 2 Sati beers.
No carbonation at all, too?
They were interpretations. I don't know if they were carbonated.
Because Americans just can't
remember.
handle like the no carb.
Right.
I mean, they're all about no carbs these days, but it's more like keto no carbs.
Yeah.
But no carbonation, they can't handle.
Can't handle it. No.
Yeah.
And you did ask about one other. That was a 2-part
Carol
question.
Sister Doris.
Well, that's another place where Linda and I have both been independently of each other. Sister Doris is the last brewing nun alive in Europe. And so you've got this like 1,200-year history of nuns brewing in Europe. And they've all died, and new nuns have not become brewers. And Sister Doris she's it. She's like 70 years old.
Yep. She's like 70.
Still time to find an apprentice.
I know, that's what I'm thinking too. I think there's a lot of women. I think that I don't know if they have to become nuns or if they can. Well, the guy is like there's a guy apprenticing under her. So I wonder. I would think that there's some woman who'd be willing to go and live at this beautiful convent and eat their awesome bread that they grow the grain for themselves and make the bread and everything, and go help take over. And then maybe when there is a younger nun that wants to learn. So because Sister Doris said that all these young nuns want to do is. Pray and eat and not work hard.
And that is annoying to her.
She was so like annoyed by it. Like she loved telling this group of women, from the Pink Boot Society, that we were all there, and there was 16 of us on a bus for 9 days, and I think 9 of the women were brewers. Brewsters, Braumeister. Can't remember how we said it in German, but so she had never seen that many women brewers.
Oh wow!
Especially at her brewery,
Yeah.
And she was like, she thought she was just going to do kind of a meet and greet and show us a couple of things, and she was like, "Come down and have beers with me," and she's a special seller. Come down and have beers with me, and she brought out bread that the nuns make themselves, and they grow the grain and everything. She brought out, meats that they did themselves, charcuterie and, bologna and stuff. And actually, I guess it wouldn't be that there. It would be sausage, probably. Mm-hmm. But she brought all that stuff out because she couldn't believe there was all these women brewers at her place, and we were all sitting around this table in a cellar. That's her special room, and she was so happy and she was like, they were like this. like Denise Jones, who's also in Tara's book, they were discussing with the interpreter and Terry of, yeast and things like that she uses, and she loved
Science.
it.
Pure science.
Yeah, she was so happy. I think Denise Jones should go take Sister Doris's spot.
Denise Jones is who brought me to Sister Doris's in the first place.
See, there you go. And Laura Ulrich, that was one of the co-founders of Pink Boots, she was totally, super into that also. But yeah, she's at Stone. I'm sure, obviously, Laura's in the book too, I'm sure.
Laura's all over the book.
And then Terry
like
Garndorf,
her.
founder of the Pink Boot Society, is in there. I'm trying to think of who else is there. Because, as people listen to this podcast, if they want to go look up some of these brewers as well as get Tara's book, Carol Stout. Tell people about Carol Stout.
Well, Carol Stout is
The D.
Yeah.
Yes.
STOUDT.
She's the second woman in contemporary history to own her own brewery, contemporary American history, own her own brewery, and be the brewmaster at the same time. She's outside Philly. She just retired recently, but she when people think of women in beer very often, at least on the East Coast, that's the one name they know.
Yeah.
So yeah, she's a fabulous mentor and example for other women.
Well, I didn't know about her till you told me about her. I mean, I think there's a lot of people out there that won't know until they get this book, but they, and then you start exploring. You start, you read Dr. Pat's book, the Ancient Ales books, and you just start going to people's breweries, and
Well, and that's such a fun, I think, important part of the forgotten history part, that there are so many contemporary women who have been forgotten, like Melly Pullman, for instance, who, as far as all of my research shows, was the first brewery co-owner and brewmaster in contemporary America. I keep saying the word contemporary. You know what I mean? She was only there a short time. She worked at Wasatch. She was a co-founder of Wasatch in Utah. And she vanished from the beer world for like 30 years. Nobody had ever heard of her. And now she's back. And Beth Hartwell, who was co-founder of the brewery that became Pyramid,
That's nuts.
disappeared from the brewing world. And I don't say this to give myself credit, but I worked really hard to find her, and then I kind of resurrected her, right? I introduced her to all these brewing women, and she hadn't been part of the beer scene in, again, decades. And so it's really nice to be able to give these women the attention that they never got.
Yeah.
Because as we said before, their husbands tended to be taking the spotlight, and then now here they are,
or their
getting their own
partners.
due.
Like New
Their
Albion,
partners,
New
yeah.
Albion,
Right,
the
right.
partners. Everybody thinks Jack McAuliffe, which Jack McAuliffe is cool. We love Renee, but Susie and what was the other lady? Jane from New Albion were instrumental in getting New Albion
They funded
going.
the entire operation. Jack didn't put a cent of his own in at the beginning, and nobody has ever heard of the two women who co-founded New Albion with Jack.
And you ended up interviewing them, and it wasn't easy
It wasn't easy
to get, find them. I was asking other people. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to ask Brian Hunt because he worked at, I'm asking all these people. And she's like, we had to do a search to get a hold of Susie for you. And I think Teresa McCullough.
Tom Acatali
Yeah.
put us in touch, and then it took several years for her to agree to do the interview. It wasn't until
Yeah.
Teresa McCullough at the
That's it.
Smithsonian interviewed her, vouched for me that she
Oh,
agreed to do
wow.
it. It took probably 4 years of emailing Susie to win her over so she would talk to me. Yeah. Jane never ended up talking to me. Some people didn't want to be found.
Yeah.
And we've actually found Jade. I know where she is, and she won't talk to me. She lives right by you. She won't talk to me.
Yeah. Some people, it's just that's a history. That's an old me. I don't want to.
Yeah.
There's probably a lot of wounds from that you're I don't want to reopen them. I don't care about your book
Yeah.
enough to do that.
Yeah,
And
wow.
that's the reality of anything like this, where you're doing a big project where you're going back decades to people who have been lost to the sands of time. Some of them don't want to be unearthed, and that's fine. They have their reasons. Maybe one day they'll change their mind. Maybe that's, a version down the road, but maybe when they see your book, like, oh, maybe it's something I would want to talk to.
Right. They could see how beautifully written it is
So
and
maybe she'll
respectful.
be a book too.
I should mail her a book, actually.
Mail her
Just do
a
it.
book.
I
great,
like that
or mail it
idea.
to, or I'll take one of the stack to her. You sign it for her, and I'll find a way to do it like where I don't look like a stalker. I'm like sneaking up with the package.
You got it.
Book.
Do it.
What's in that box?
All
Any
right.
other questions for us, Mr. Ben?
I don't have any. We've gone far too long. You
I
guys
know,
have
I'm
things to do.
sorry.
No, that's my fault. I
no,
have
this is fun.
It's right in front of me. I can just cut it off, but I didn't do it, and that's my fault. Woman's Place is in the Brew House, coming out September 21st through Chicago Review Press. I didn't say this at the beginning. You can get a discount on that. Use the promo code BarleyMe25 to get 25% off if you order directly from Chicago Review Press.
Really?
Look at
done.
that.
Thank you.
Tie
Wait,
in.
was there a Did you give the promo code?
Yeah, BarleyMe25.
And I want to let everybody know also that we will have more book signings set up for Tara and her book, and readings, and hopefully some tastings to go along with those throughout the country, and hopefully in Europe and other places too, as things are
As
safer.
things open up,
safer,
yep.
and
Yeah.
so be looking for in the Bay Area, Russian River Brewery for sure. We'll be doing one at Windsor. We met with Natalie about that already. Full
Anchor
Sail,
Brewing.
Anchor.
Nice.
I'm talking to Omnivore Books, Copperfield's Books. Also, check for your independent bookstores.
Yes.
Also for these
Absolutely.
books.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ask for it if it's not there.
Yep.
Yes.
A Woman's Place is in the brew house.
We're gonna go up to Pike's hopefully in Seattle.
Pike in Seattle, yep.
Pike's Brewing Company in Seattle, because Roseanne Finkel, very instrumental in all. Let's talk about Roseanne actually real quick, because because they brought Belgian
Yeah.
beer into America.
They sure did. Yes.
Oh, and also when they were doing they have this beer museum in the Pike's Brewing
Yes.
at the really famous Pike's Market in Seattle.
Yep.
It's in Pike Place.
Yeah, in Pike Place, and you can go into that. They just remodeled it, made it even bigger. I haven't seen the remodel. I think you have. And they would do a fundraising beer and day also for Planned Parenthood every year, which was
Yes,
really
that's
cool.
true. Yes.
Yeah, but Roseanne, and Charles, they brought Belgian beer into the.
Yeah, if you like Belgian beer, there are a small handful of people to thank, and they are definitely primo among them. They brought in some of the first family-owned Belgian beers
Orval.
in the country. And Sammy's, they were very instrumental. They also had some family-owned British and German breweries. So Iinger Celebrator, thanks to the Finkles, all the Sammy Smith,
Love it.
Taddy Porter, Nut Brown, Yum.
Samuel Smith, yummy.
that's
Nut
thanks
Brown
to
Ale,
Roseanne
yep.
Finkel too. So yeah, they Roseanne passed last year, but
Oh.
Charles Finkel's still around, and Pike Brewing in Seattle is their place.
All right, so before we get out of here, besides the book, where else can people find you, Tara?
My website is under construction. Yet that
In
is the best
preparation
place.
for?
Yes, for all the new exciting book events. It's taranurin.com. That's TARANURIN.com.
And her Instagram, which of course will announce also that the website's ready and book signings
Yes,
and things.
and on social. I'm
Yeah,
at
social
Tara
media.
Nurin everywhere.
Twitter and
Please
Facebook
follow.
and-
Thank you. And you can order the book if you don't see it in the bookstore on all the booksellers. Amazon, Chicago Review Press, bookshop.org is a good indie bookstore website.
And anywhere else people can find you? I know you're not just writing this book. You write other articles,
Forbes.
things
Look
like
for her
that.
on Forbes.
Yeah, published in Forbes, no big deal.
Right?
I have a page on Forbes. It's probably easiest to just say, search for taranurin.com Forbes, and my page will come up because it's not a simple URL.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can find my stories there, various and sundry other online and print publications. So I don't know. I think Google's your
750?
friend when it comes to this sort of thing.
Yeah.
750.
750 Daily,
Yeah,
Vine
like the
Pair, etc. Thank you for
And
asking.
Herlinda, you're very welcome. Herlinda Heras, where can people find you?
I am
and know
Beer
what you're
Golf
doing?
Girl Travels on Instagram, Beer Golf Girl on Twitter. I'm on Facebook, and you can actually find Our radio broadcast is live radio show on Thursdays at 5 p.m. in Santa Rosa Pacific time, and then that gets converted by an agency in San Francisco, in LA or something, that they cut out the commercials and the traffic and all that, and it's on podcast on Spotify and iTunes and all those as well. So you can, and that's Brew Ha Ha, BREWHAHA. And unfortunately, as we're talking about this Me Too and misogyny, you'll see what I'm talking about when you see how it's titled. So anyway, not my doing, but I do book all the guests and set up the interviews and do a lot of traveling. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. I actually post a lot of when I'm doing beer judging, like in Finland or Italy, Portugal, Poland, California State, although I didn't do that this year because I was in Finland.
Always up to something.
Yes,
True.
she is.
Even when I try, I'm looking at the books on the Dr. Pat's book. So I got 3 books of his signed by him, and I don't have the time to sit down and read it. And I'm hoping I have time to read Tara's book when it comes out.
She's a busy girl. She's a busy girl.
Yeah, because then we're going to start, with the book tour. So I would like some little bit of time to do some reading and do some laundry, because I've been back from Helsinki just a few days, and I'm
jet lag showing.
Jet lagged. I've already done a book site. I've done travels to the Sierras, 2 days of public health. I've also been working in a vaccine clinic through the pandemic, trying to get us back to, So all I'm going to tell you guys, please get your vaccine. Get your family and friends to get their vaccine so we can get on to beer festivals, traveling.
Yes, we've got
person.
Traveling to do, and this is getting in our way.
Yes,
everybody needs their vaccine.
Yes. And then if we get hurt while we're traveling, we really, really need some beds free just in case. So let's get everybody well.
Yeah, for sure. And most McCann with the Women's International Beer Summit and
Yes.
Queen of Beer, my preferred Pilsner glass, by the way.
Nice.
Which is lovely. We're Women's International Beer Summit on Instagram, which is international is the INTL in the middle instead of international spelled out. Facebook page is Women's International Beer Summit, and that's how you find us right now, or wcfa.beer.
And then you can find Barley Me across social media at Barley and Me Pod. Email questions, comments, concerns to barleymepod@gmail.com. Go to barleymepod.com to find absolutely nothing worth looking at. Don't forget to check out my basketball and beer podcast, Please Dunk Responsibly, where we compare players to beers, beers to players. It's the off-season. We're going to go nuts. Who knows what we're going to talk about until the season comes back. And, of course, I'm also Bengineering, a advice podcast called It's Crazier in My Business, with Becky Lynn and Tavi answering listener questions, which I think I have to go record right after this.
Right on.
So,
cheers, people.
yeah, this has been episode... I was wrong. It's episode 154 of Barley and Me with Tara Nurin. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Herlinda Heras, thank you so much.
Cheers.
Melissa McCann, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks so much for listening. Get home safe.